Okay, today we're going to talk about Shivvers Grain Dryers. So Shivvers drying bins. I talk to quite a lot of people a year on Shivvers Grain Dryers, and I personally have sold Shivvers Grain Dryers in the past, and there's just a lot to get into with any grain dryer on the pros and cons. Every grain dryer has its downsides. So, with that said, let's look at the Shivvers Grain Dryer today, and we're gonna look at some of the concepts of the Shivvers Grain Dryer. We're gonna look at some of the concepts of Mixflow, Crossflow, and Top Dry to bring them all together, because when it comes to buying a grain dryer, you have to decide what problems you want to deal with. I hate to put it that way, but you have to decide what problems you want to deal with. Do you want to deal with this issue or that issue? So we're going to start with the good part of a Shivvers grain dryer. A Shivvers grain dryer has a control panel. They had the command center. Now they have the Premier or whatever. It's a touchscreen controller now. I don't have as much experience on the touchscreen as the older command center, but they both work the same. So, I mean, there's some more options on the touchscreen controller, but the drying, the way the drying process works is the same on both. So they have fans and heaters on the bin. They have a moisture sensor in this vertical tube, and they start the fans and heaters and they blow hot air up through a bed of grain in the bin. Here I have it shown like this, with grain in there. Here I have it shown here, and I'm just going to be using the open concept drawing here because it's easier to see what's going on. So in this setup, you have heat blowing up through this bed of grain. It blows heat up through the bed of grain depending on your settings. Might dry for 20 minutes or 45 minutes or there in between. There's variants of how long it'll dry for. And then what will happen is the vertical auger, the drying system starts. This motor right out here on the unload, which runs a shaft in through the sender, runs the gearbox, and the gearbox runs this vertical auger and runs these floor augers and starts bringing corn into here, pulling it up, and spreading it back on top, out the top of here. Now the sensor is in this tube, so it will run for 3 minutes and get a moisture sample of that corn. If the corn is as dry or drier than what you have the set point at, this auger, your transfer auger, will start and go to the storage bin. So this system, if it's dry, if the sensor reads dry enough, this system keeps running, and this starts, and the grain goes out here instead of going up and spreading out the top. And that starts transferring. When the moisture sensor reads moisture that exceeds the set point, this auger system shuts down, has a clean out time, this shuts down. So when the corn's dry enough, the unload runs. When the corn gets too wet, the unload stops. Due to that way of operating, their automation works really well. I'm going to say really well. So for a moisture controlled dryer controls, their automation, I would say, is the best, or at least one of the best in the industry. So for controls, they have some of the best in the industry, and this is where they get their name, because when the corn gets too wet, it stops going out. When the corn gets dry enough, it starts going out. So you never walk up and see that it's dumping wetter corn than what you want it to dump. It's not like a variable speed continuous flow dryer where when the corn gets wet, it just slows down, but you walk up and it's actually discharging corn that's wetter than your set point, but it's discharging it real slow. Whereas with this dryer, the corn has to be as dry as it's set to dry. That is the good part of a Shivvers grain drying system. I would say that is a big selling point. Another selling point is a farmer will have a grain bin and he will have a stirrator in it. And he will run a stir to dry his corn. And he decides he wants to automate it because the stir, he fills the bin and then he has to wait a few days for it to get empty. And he says, well, I want automation so it slowly empties the bin all the time and makes things nicer, speeds up drying. So in reality, if you have a couple of fans on this bin and it is a stirring bin, you pull the stirrator out, you put this, unload the Shivvers system in it, and your drying capacity will be less. You will have less drying capacity with a Shivvers system than you will with a stirring bin with the same horsepower and fans on it. This is a known fact. The Shivvers sales reps will even tell you that you will reduce capacity and their system will dry slower than a stirring bin. Now, where does this come in at? Like, I knew this was a thing, and then when I heard Shivvers say it themselves, then it's like, where does this come in at? Well, I have had customers I put these in for in the past, and then I said, well, I went to a customer that had an old soak-up 4-way system, which was basically the same thing. And the soak-up 4-way system did not have this vertical auger in the middle. It had the unload. Well, Shivvers offers, this would be called like a circulator too, this system here. Shivvers offers what they call the dry flow. The dry flow does not have this vertical. It has this unload auger. And the customer I put this in at, and I've dealt with them a few times, a couple different systems, where they left the stirs in the bin and had the unload auger, and they actually got more capacity with the stirrator in the bin than without the stirrator in the bin in a Shivvers bin. Because in a stirring bin, the grain is always being loosened up. The grain's always being loosened up, which makes the air flow through it easier. It's being stirred, but it's also being loosened up. In the Shivvers bin, you put this bed of grain in here, and it just settles in tighter and tighter, and the air blows through harder and harder. So if you have a stirrator in it, and it loosens the grain up, and you cut them augers off 18 inches to 2 foot above the floor, your 2 foot above the floor, I should say, your Shivvers system will work fine, but you will get faster drying because you won't have this hard packed wet corn on top here sealing off the airflow. So in a Shivvers bin, there's some more details. Capacity is less than a stirring bin if you don't have stirs in it. Next thing is grain quality. So your grain quality is good in a Shivvers bin. You will have good grain quality because grain quality is basically built off of drying speed. Whether you're running 250 degrees to dry that corn or 110 degrees to dry that corn, how fast you dry the corn is the biggest determining factor on the grain quality. So in this bin, all the corn that's in the bin is getting heated up, and so it dries. You come out with good grain quality because even though the corn might be hotter coming out of here than out of your normal cross flow dryer, you will end up with better grain quality because of how slow it dries. Now, one thing in these Shivvers type bins, is you're continually unloading off the bottom and you're continually adding grain to the top. What happens is it blows the moisture up through and it's making the grain on top wetter. It's steaming that grain. So it's not drying the top grain, it's steaming it and pushing the moisture out of the bottom grain. So you're making the top grain, if anything, wetter, and you keep piling grain on top. So you're steaming the top grain, which heats it up and does make good grain quality. But your drying speed is slow. To keep pulling through like that, you have a really thick bed of grain. Now we can look at, there's a couple other dryers I want to look at where you have a thick bed of grain like this. We have the top dry, and on the top dry we have a bed of grain. That bed of grain, if it's a batch dryer, you dry the whole batch and then you dump it out. If you're running an autoflow, the dry grain is coming in the top and you're doing moisture drying out here, so it's blowing the moisture out. So even though you're continually adding and you have a deep bed of grain, you're not dumping the grain onto the top of your grain you're drying. The grain is coming in and flowing out through, not down through. So your drying speed takes much less horsepower in a top dry, dries way faster with much less horsepower, and due to the settling of the grain and the moisture, all the moisture coming out of the grain you're drying, getting pushed up through the grain that is going to be getting dried. So then we're going to go on to one of the things that I get calls on a half dozen times a year is the capacity. So how do they work in capacity? Now, a Shivvers dryer, I mean, for how handy they are, to take an old stirring bin, throw a Shivvers in it, or just put up a grain bin, throw a Shivvers system in it, they're a very handy concept. And the automation is great. They have lots of moving parts. They have a serious gearbox here in the middle. It is a quality gearbox, but you got a lot of moving parts under the grain. If something breaks, you have to empty the bin to fix it and then start over again. On capacity, it is normal for people to be upset with their capacity. I've sold less Shivvers dryers in my life than any other brand and had more negative feedback on Shivvers than any other dryer. When it comes to capacity, they don't get capacity. They will give you a paper saying that it's a certified whatever capacity. That paper means nothing. I know people who have papers that their dryer gets 60 or 70, 60% at times the capacity of what the paperwork says, and they're told that's normal. So you're going to get, with a Shivvers bin, you're going to hear a lot of, oh, you farm Pioneer corn, so that dries harder. Your corn dries harder because of the hybrid you're growing or your growing season. There's always going to be a reason why your corn dries hard. And it's all excuses. Yes, growing seasons affect how hard the corn dries. That does vary from year to year. But if that is the problem, then one year it's going to do good. You're going to have years when you can remove 10 points of moisture and it's worked the way it's supposed to. So on the Shivvers dryer, I guess another thing I want to look at when we're looking at Shivvers is cross-flow dryers. So cross-flow dryers, there again, it's a little bed of corn, blows out through, the moisture exhausts out, so you don't run into the moisture blowing into the new corn. The Mixflow dryers, you look at them, and they have a 30-inch thick heating duct, and some of your Different commercial Mixflows and that'll have up to 7 foot thick 7 foot thick grain column. But from heat duct to exhaust duct, the air only goes through about 13 inches of corn. So because it's not blowing across a thick column, it's going from heat duct that you do not see from the outside to the exhaust duct, which is about 13 inches of corn. And because of the way the grain is flowing down across the ducts, it's looser. It's always loosening that corn up, so you don't get a solid thick bed of corn that is settled in place and hard and hard to push the air through. So I guess my overall finish on the Shivvers drying system is the automation is some of the best in the business, and that is because they shut the unload off when it gets wet instead of just slowing it down. So it's not always necessarily working better, but it is less emotional. You don't get the emotional decisions you make on running a dryer where you walk up and, oh shoot, we're too wet. You don't have that with a Shivvers dryer so much. And their moisture sensor is a good sensor. I mean, it works quite well. I have to say that. I have to say, overall, their automation works the way it's supposed to work. Works the way it's designed to work. But capacity is, I mean, if you're drying 50,000 bushel a year of corn at 10-point removal, they will work great for you. If you're drying 400,000 bushel a year at 10 to 10 point or more removal, you will not like it. They just don't perform. Now, I've seen these where we're drying small grains or beans or something odd, and we're removing a couple points of moisture, 2 or 3 points of moisture, and they really work. Like, because then this grain don't get so wet on top, and the air is able to get through better with lighter grains like barley or soybeans, and the air goes through easier, and then you don't run into trouble. But if you're getting into corn that's 10-point removal, that's when you run into this being a bed of grain that you can walk on without sinking in, and taking a lot of air pressure to push the air through. And you can put big fans on, but you're only going to do so much, and you're just going to run a lot of horsepower for the amount of moisture removed. So I guess I'm not making this review to promote or demote the Shivvers unit. They have some of the greatest controls in the market, but their drying capacity is not good due to pushing the moisture to the incoming grain. The corn that comes in always is getting steamed with wet air, and capacity is. I would definitely look at other options, because then once you have a Shivvers system, you're kind of stuck with it. It's kind of like a stirring bin. Like, a stirring bin is great for the farmer who is drying 30 or 50,000 bushel of corn a year, but once you're running more than 2 batches a year through a stirring bin, you really need to look at something else. That's why I often say, if you're drying a little bit of corn and you're not drying a lot per year, you're almost better off getting a GT dryer, a GT batch dryer. Not sure if I have a picture of one of them. Do a little look in here. I don't believe that I have anything on a. I do have something on a GT dryer, but I should have pulled it up ahead of time. That way I could quick pull it over. But I'm not seeing anything right now. So that's why I push for a GT dryer, a batch dryer that you hook on the tractor, or you can get electric motor for for a first dryer to dry 30,000 bushel a year, because when you decide to upgrade, you can easily put in a continuous flow portable dryer, or it's easier to switch from that dryer to a more commercial quality dryer. And whereas if you put a Shivvers in, then you get your whole grain system laid out for that. And then if you want to go to a commercial quality grain dryer, then your design might not be ideal. So that's my thoughts on the Shivvers drying system. Capacity gets a low rating, horsepower takes a lot, automation is the best, or one of the better ones, and yeah, that's it. Hope that answers some questions and helps you understand how to make decisions moving forward. And but I'll continue to take phone calls, so just because I made a video don't mean I'm not willing to keep taking phone calls. Thank you.